Hey guys, what is up? Cobra Axis and Allies here. So, I guess how we're going to be doing these update videos is I'm going to probably try to have like about 2 years in this one video, so that'll be 4 turns basically. So, this is at the end of July 1939, and so war has just been declared, Germany and Italy have declared war on the Allied powers, except for Russia, of course. So, I guess first off, we'll start out with the German turn, and you can see this is the German advance into all of Europe right now, and it's pretty extensive. Like, if you guys saw the opening setup, and of course, I told you that Germany might want to try and hold off on attacking France, but they decided to just go for it, and you can see right there that was literally all they had left. They lost a ton of planes too, so by the skin on their teeth, they got through it. You can see too that Vichy France has joined the Axis powers because the British declared war on them. Now, after Germany's first turn, they were spread extremely thin, so you can see France, they've really got nothing to garrison it right now. Denmark, the British tried to recapture, but the 2 German infantry were able to hold out there. So, I guess next up we've got the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, so Russia invaded. And playing as Russia, I was debating on just not signing it because I think it kind of negatively affects the Russian player. The one good thing I like is that by capturing Poland, you know you're going to lose it, but it provides like a bulwark. So if the Germans want to blitz in, they're going to have to go through an extra territory. So, as I said before, with Vichy France surrendering, their colonies, which you can see, this is pretty much it. So, Germany really didn't get a lot of units from it or anything. Plus, the whole intent of declaring war on Vichy was to destroy the navy, which was in that sea zone. So the British came up from here and blew up the navy. Plus the 2 German ships that went from French to German. So then you can see that the Italians afterwards mopped up, where they sent their fleet out like in all directions. So you can see that they came around here, blew up the British off the coast of France, so now there is no Allied ships in the Mediterranean. The Russians are still neutral, as I said, so they're just trying to get out of there, the Mediterranean, I guess. The Italians have kind of blockaded, so the Italians don't start with the transport in this setup either. So basically, turn 1, they're not able to really, they got some gains over here by moving in there, because the British sent up some forces to try to take southern France, but it ended up not being a possibility. So basically the Italian strategy right now is to blockade the Mediterranean. So you can see the French have a decently sized navy with you can see there, and now that was on its way to the Mediterranean to assist the British, but now that the British are gone, they could have probably come in here if the Italians had taken heavier losses, but they didn't. So now the strategy basically for Italy is to use their superior navy right there, which is, I guess, not too much bigger than the French, but it does have a battleship. Plus the Italians do have a decent air force. We can see we got a elite tactical a torpedo bomber there and a fighter there, plus the various air assets they have in Africa, which can easily make it into any fleet engagement in the Mediterranean. So, and then you can see over here, the British had a destroyer, battleship, and transport. They were using that to get units from India, but the Italians sent a really small task force, and it was a light cruiser destroyer and a torpedo boat destroyer, and basically the biggest thing was just to try and destroy that navy there, and then have something left over to kind of blockade the Suez Canal and make sure those British have to fight their way through over there. So the British decided to go all in for the Middle East. So you can see that their Egyptian units went into Syria to take that from the Vichy. They took no losses on that. And because they declared war on the Vichy units, of course, turned German, which meant there was an Axis unit in Syria, which meant that Iraq went to the Axis. And Britain anticipated that by dropping troops off in Kuwait, plus the forces they're going to have in Syria next turn. They should be able to deal with it. One German, probably maybe militia being built there afterwards. So I guess that's kind of the European theater right now. The purchases are just kind of like infantry here and there. A couple ships went off the build chart. Oh yeah, there was a kind of the battle of the Graf Spee down here in the South Pacific. You can see that German commerce raider, like auxiliary ship, escaped the battle, and it kind of went down like the Falklands, or like the Battle of I think it was the River Plate, I think. But yeah, so basically we've got the small little British task force right here, and it was kind of pretty respective of the real life battle where a couple British light cruiser and a destroyer came in, and they were able to sink the battle cruiser with no casualties. So that kind of sucked for the Germans, but definitely a good victory for the British. So in Europe, so there was a ton of German losses, basically navally. So I'm just going to show you a top-down view, because the Germans, as you can see, were able to take a lot of Poland, France, and they were able to come up here and take these two zones in Norway. But the problem is that they were spread extremely thin. So what happened was the British Navy came in here to this sea zone and trying to knock out Denmark. They had 3 units. They were basically repelled back by these Danish infantry, or German infantry. They also invaded southern Norway to take that back from the Germans. So the German fleet is almost non-existent. We've just got that cruiser, and the Russian fleet is looking massive because of all the units they're pulling back. The Russians are also primed for possibly a winter war invasion, or maybe even extra, because of the fact that they might just keep going into Finland. They've annexed some of the Baltic states too. So then, and invaded Iran. That's the last thing Russia kind of did. The Japanese are just kind of, like in real life, just slowly pushing their way into China, using their air power to whittle away at the Chinese forces. They've at least established a beachhead in northern China. They've got a connected route, and they've got to kind of do that down there. And what I've decided to do for the Japanese is that my strategy is kind of secure the coast, because of the fact that with the forces I have, I don't think I'm going to be able to get too far into China if they keep building. And my Navy is probably going to go, once I do that, I'm going to spread my naval power out to try and just be able to take the southern parts of Asia and hold back the Americans. My strategy is basically to beef up the island defenses, mainly in terms of like ships, like have destroyers and subs stationed, like small units that can just kind of do suicide runs on the Americans and try to whittle them down. And then for Anzac, they start with 2 transports, so they're primed and ready to go off to Africa next turn, and probably wage war on the Italian East African front. But yeah, so I guess that's an overview of July of 1939, and I will see you again in January of 1940. Hello guys, what is up? it is now the winter of 1940, and a good amount has happened. Now, I guess I'll show you what's gone down so far. So let's start with Germany. So I guess in terms of Germany, they didn't do much. They kind of strengthened their Polish front. They invaded Yugoslavia, which ended up aligning with Croatia, joining the Axis. And you can see right there, we've got the Croatian army, which are basically just Germans. They have consolidated their air force and lost Norway. They had a pretty weak hold on it before, and now it's fallen to the British. You can see here's their Polish army, a lot of tanks. They were able to capture Greenland, and now they're basing a bunch of bombers out of it for runs against Britain. As you can see, a lot of them bombed Britain as they flew over. The Italians have gone down into Africa and taken out Egypt just barely. The Americans lend-leased a bomber to the French, and the Anzac Commonwealth forces are trying to clear out the Italians from down in South Africa, near South Africa. The Russians launched an ill-fated attack against Karelia, Lapland. They were able to take out a little more handily. They fully took out the Middle East. They killed off some Afghanistani soldiers, but weren't able to take it, so that'll probably happen next turn. The Chinese are holding out as the Japanese didn't make too much of any claims. They have consolidated and now have a full-on beachhead on the Chinese mainland. The Americans haven't done much. They've just built this militia down here in Alaska. The Japanese, in keeping to my defensive strategies, are basing submarines and aircraft around the Pacific, not only priming for a southeastern Asian campaign, but also to harass the Americans that try to send forces over. The British were able to kick out the Germans from Iraq and a little German incursion on Transjordan, and the Vichy, now German forces, were able to take the last French holding in North Africa. And you can see now, there is our state of the world in Europe right now. So yeah, that's what's gone down so far, and we're going to have to see what happens next turn. Okay, now it is January of 1941. So a lot of stuff has happened in the last turn, and we're probably going to cut this video at the end of 1941. So this will be the start of the end of this video, and then we'll go on to part 2. So I guess as usual, we'll start with Germany and what they did. So you can see that not much has changed in Europe really at all. The only things that they built would have been these ships that they completed, basically just a battleship, and a fast battleship, and a light cruiser that they got from the French. And in terms of builds, you can see they've just added to their pile of tanks to, again, prepare for the invasion of Russia, which is pretty much the general Axis plan right now, to probably declare war maybe next turn, but also kind of, especially with Japan, probably 1942. So with Germany, like I said, not much happening in Europe. The only major thing they did on land would have been to invade Greece, which they've done. The Italians didn't have the assets to take southern Greece, so they're probably going to end up taking that this turn. Then, I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but in the last video, but when Germany invaded Yugoslavia, Slovenia was still a British, it aligned to the British, and the Germans left nothing in Hungary, so the British were able to take Hungary, but the Germans have sealed that up again. Then so I guess Norway, I don't know if you guys have seen again, but it is completely out of the German hands, although the Germans sent over some of their air power, which is, again, another thing I really like. Just all the air power that you get in 1939. Like, I didn't even need units here. I just sent over a bomber and a fighter, and I was able to carpet bomb and take out all of the land units they had defending Norway. So that'll be less of a thorn in my side when I want to go back and take that back from the British. So you can see the air power is slightly reduced here, and in Greenland, which is basically my main base of operations right now, is the Germans. I really like using this as an air base because what I've found, and I've left the convoy markers on the map, is that I was gonna plan to go on a bombing raid. So right here is my main hub of aircraft in Europe, and that is it right there. Basically, like my strategic bomber command, and I brought the bombers, thinking that I'm gonna go for London there, and you can see that London has a bunch of fighters and tactical bombers and stuff that's going to be able to scramble up and all that. But then I remembered that there's the convoy raiding aircraft in this game. So I just, scrounged together every aircraft I could get. And of course, I've got long range aircraft, plus these medium bombers, soon to have an air base, plus the stuff I have in Europe. And I was able to just send that out all across the Atlantic Ocean. And I guess not all across, basically just the important lines up north. And pretty much convoy, I had, too many planes to even effectively convoy raid. Like, I could have probably spared 2 or 3 aircraft to just combat duties if I had them. It is going to be a little bit harder because the Americans are up to 44 IPCs, and they now have ships on escort duty, so that kind of sucks. Although at the same time, I may just, build a few more medium bombers to replace my losses, and then send these guys out on more convoy raiding, because especially with stuff like the destroyer, one destroyer shooting back at me is better than anti-aircraft guns on a factory, I think. So there's that. So I guess that's it for the Germans. The Russians are really not doing good in the Winter War campaign. As a Russian play, for me at least with Russia, I kind of see no use of attacking Finland, because even if you take Karelia with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and Finland has peace with you and doesn't invade back, you still have to deal with them as a German-aligned state afterwards. So I decided to try, I thought I could use my resources and, completely destroy Finland's fighting capacity. So I invaded here and here, but as you can see, the Finns were able to come back, take this back, opening up that rail link, and then Lend-Lease flew into Karelia, and now I'm basically trying to bolster my lines just to not face a counterattack into actual Russia. So Russia pretty much sealed up its Middle Eastern front. The British were able to take back some of the desert, and the funny thing is Rome was poorly defended by the Italians, and the British sent in their units, their mechanized units, but then they ended up all rolling 12s and retreating, and then it was up to a French heavy bomber there that got Lend-Lease to them, and they were able to wipe out the rest of the Italians in Egypt. But of course now the Italians have transports, and they were able to reinforce the Egyptian campaign. They've got a new colonial infantry there, they're airborne. And then we've got the British right there that are coming back up, although at the same time the Germans do have a small Africa Corps, so plus a fighter, so they should be able to lend some support in defending Egypt. The Russians decided to invade Mongolia, and with what forces they started with, they were able to pretty much take out, limit Mongolia's fighting capacity. So Japan didn't even build a militia to kind of help out Mongolia. They've got too much to deal with. And as Japan, I kind of prepped some invasion forces and everything, but at the same time, I'm gonna probably wait till next turn because I'm usually used to 36, where even though it's not super realistic, Japanese in my 36 games have pretty much always been to about here. They've captured everything. The Burma Road especially is closed, and then the Chinese are relegated to some mountainous terrain that they don't get any money from. Just trying to get you guys a better look at the overall board. Sorry about that glare. But yeah, in 1939, it's a little bit more realistic in the sense of Chinese forces are built up, and it's really hard to rout them from the. Once you get past the shores and your battleships don't lend any support, it's really hard to keep pushing. And the Chinese launched a big old counterattack to try and take back. I think I had 3 SNLF. And the funny thing is that they sent in probably like 10 infantry, a couple artillery guns, and that 3 SNLF was able to hold the line because they rolled poorly and most of them retreated. The Americans, up to the decent amount of IPCs that they are, were able to reinforce some of their areas in the Pacific. Plus, they've got this fleet that I've dubbed the Asiatic Squadron, and that's going to be coming down to reinforce the Philippines. I know that Japan gets their target select and whatever to, or not target select, but a boosted surprise attack. But I feel like as America, I can afford these ships if they, are launched to the Philippines, and then and as you can see too, the Philippines have been bolstered by land forces, and I may even fly over some aircraft next turn. But the Japanese, regardless of their boosts and everything for the first strike, are going to have to fight me, then allot ships to bombard. Plus, it's going to get in their way if they're going to have to also go for all the Dutch East Indies. You can see the Anzac bought a sub. The German commerce raider, this guy's been on a pretty big adventure. He started the game off of South America. He convoy raided the Atlantic line. He was hunted down by this task force here, but then they ended up missing. And the special ability of that commerce raider is that he has no defense or attack, but if you miss on the first round, he can run away 3 spaces. So he's also survived an attack by this Anzac sub and is basically just going around the world like a World War II Emden raid, just kind of destroying everything and evading capture by enemy forces. On the African front, like I already showed you, kind of North Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is really kind of just a slow grind as Commonwealth forces take out the last Italian units in Abyssinia. The one Abyssinian militia took out 2 Commonwealth forces, so that was a pretty decent defense by the Italians. Like I think for one militia in a territory not worth anything, that was a pretty good defense I put up. Then, as you know, the Vichy have gone German now, and what my plan was for Germany is to build a few militia, then upgrade them to infantry, and then just start pushing. But although I can bring down some air supports, so that may be an idea to slowly convert these guys to infantry, and then try to push. Basically, a lot of non-worth anything territories, but if we can get to Cameroon, we'll take that IPC, and then possibly threaten some more of South Africa, more resources that have to go in here. And by the looks of these convoy raiding activities that I'm putting up, the British aren't going to be able to afford that. Especially with you'll see next turn if it ends up holding. My main plan with Germany is to still spread out my influence, probably more air power, and I can afford to do a little less on the ground units because a little quick look at the western front or eastern front shows you that there really isn't much units. I am going to have to push back these fortified lines. And this is a strategy I tried with Russia where basically, I'll show you with the land zones, you can kind of work with your land zones where you've got a city here, so you close the gap with the fortification. And then same here. This one's a little harder because you do have, there you go. You do have 2 lines that a fortification would need to be on. So I've just got one here to hold the Pripyat marshes, and then instead of being way back, I held this one up front so that the Germans are going to have to hit there, and then they can't, well, I guess they're going to blitz through, but then they're going to have to face that fortification there. So, yeah. But other than that, I mean, there really isn't a lot defending Russia, so if I can make some headway, do some carpet bombing on the first turn, I should be able to limit their fighting capacity. So, basically, I just want to make up my aircraft losses because the main key of Greenland right now is... oh, and I guess I didn't tell you guys that the British tried to do a big old counterattack. They had about 4 infantry and a couple these medium bombers here, battleship bombardments, and they weren't able to take out Greenland. So, as Germany, I want to put even more money into Greenland to try and fortify it because of the Americans. They're really going to be able to put a ton on Greenland. So, the more the better there because it is a good asset, not only with convoy rating, but even with so say if I declared war on America, I could send over my medium bombers and take out isolated ships like there, and yeah. So we're going to have to see how it goes in the latter half of 1941. Alright, it is now the end of 1941, and not much has happened this turn, but we'll just show you guys this and continue on into 1942. So, as we can see with Germany, again, like I said, really not much at all has happened. Mainland Greece has been fully occupied. The Germans have sufficiently built up along, you've got 2 task force army markers, which are representing these quite powerful mechanized forces that are ready to push into Russia. The Russians have been doing terribly on the Finnish front. They made one last major victory, but because the Germans will be declaring war next turn, we've got a lot of Finns that will be becoming German afterwards. The Soviets do have quite a decent defensive network, even if it is a lot of infantry. But the fact that they still have a pretty major air force, you can see their bomber wing is coming in soon. They have a navy that still outclasses the German navy, especially if you count the Soviet air power, plus their forces that are waiting blockaded outside of the Danish Straits. And the fact that Germany is not going to be able to bring in much air power. This is probably the closest they're going to get in a few bombing raids next turn, but most of their airplanes are still sitting in Greenland, which I'm probably going to end up pulling out of because of the fact that with America entering the war, there's not much use of it, even with stuff like these fortified lines and airbase that I've built. It's probably going to go to waste in the end, but it was a really good forward base of operations for a while. I was able to carry out a raid on Scotland where I took out a couple British medium bombers and captured the territory, so the British were diverted in that attack. So, yeah. I guess in other news, the Germans have consolidated their Africa Corps just as like a counterattack force, so if the Americans pull up in this sea zone to try to take North Africa, these forces might be able to try to launch a little counterattack or just hang back and wait for the Americans to come to them. The Italians narrowly took Gibraltar with that airborne infantry. It's one of their colonials that they sent in on an air transport, plus artillery. They lost a lot of infantry in amphibious assault. You can see there's their landing forces. Their navy's kind of split up in the Mediterranean, but they can afford it. They don't have to worry about Allied naval power or air power threatening them anytime soon. The Italians are kind of bottled up in Egypt. Like, they have transports to get out and to bring in more units, but right now they were just used in Gibraltar, so their Italian forces in Egypt are just kind of sitting there and wait. And the British have decent armies, as you can see, in Transjordan and the Sudan, but they probably won't be able to launch a full-scale attack just because not only is there the Italians and their air power, but sitting in Egypt is the Africa Corps, which Germany had just sent down. So there's that to worry about for any attack. The British have tried to kind of consolidate their navy. They're going to be sending that back to Australia to try and wage a better fight against the Japanese in the Southeast Asia campaign when that happens next turn. The Russians have kind of pulled back to a defensive line after taking Mongolia. The Japanese were able to defeat the Communist Chinese. I know they don't really surrender, but they have no territory and hardly any money and nowhere to even build. And you can see that army force marker represents these guys here. And then this navy, really large navy, that is based right here. And that is going to be picking up Marines from Japan to launch all over Southeast Asia. And you can see the Americans have really bulked up the Philippines. They've got a pretty large Asiatic squadron, even if it's going to get subject to that first strike that Japan gets during their surprise attack. The rest of the Japanese Navy is sitting over here, and its main goal is probably going to be to take out Hawaii, just to destroy some American air power. And, there's really nothing contesting those ships, so once they're sitting there, even if they get... America's probably going to lose a decent amount of units, even if they win the battle, so that's a risk Japan's willing to take. The German commerce raider is still just kind of floating around the Pacific, doing pretty decent damage against the Australian and British lines. The Italians decided to send a sub through the Suez to raid some African convoy lines. The British have pretty much neutered all Axis operations other than in Eastern Africa. Western Africa, it's really just a token defense. There's nothing really important to defend here for the Axis, and Germany ended up just placing a few units down just to kind of keep their claims, just in case. Basically, my main reasoning is if the Italians are able to start pushing back into southern Africa in some first strike attacks, these territories here can be used as landing zones for aircraft. But overall, that's pretty much it. The Americans are decently close. They're at around 45 IPCs now, but they've been rolling really badly. So, but at the same time, Japan is probably going to go to war with them next turn. So, and they've got a lot of units already waiting on escort duty in the Pacific or Atlantic. So, they are primed and ready for assaults on the European and Pacific continents. And also, one last thing, Germany was able to launch a paratrooper attack and take Trondheim from the British. But yeah, that is it for 1941, and I will see you again in the next video, part 2, for 1942 and beyond. See you guys later. Cobra, out.